Hello, welcome back. You've all been very patient while I took 5 months to eat, drink, and breathe V Rising, but we are finally back with another game devlog. And this one is actually kind of a special one because I started work on this game about 1 year ago in the middle of October 2023. So in this video we're going to talk about all the things I've done on my little fishing game in the past year, how much actual real time I spent working on it, and then we are going to talk about the features I've finished since the last devlog, so anything that you guys haven't seen here on the channel. Because even though I was in my V Rising fugue state and work was hell at the same time, I did get a bit of game work done since the last update. But before we continue, hello, I'm Savalian. I make videos about games, development, and creativity. See, I'm doing the development part again after a while. But okay, now that introductions are out of the way, let's talk about this game. We are going to start from the beginning. I actually rewatched the first video I made about this game so I could remember what I started with in that video, and all I really had in that video was an idea that I wanted it to be a fishing game and a character model. I made my little fisherwoman character and I animated her with a fishing rod, and that's basically all I had at the time, a character model and a dream. From there, I started on the procedural island generation and started building out my plan for this game because the goal of this project was always to approach it from a more flexible design perspective as a response to how some of my previous projects went, which were all had very rigid designs and ended up becoming a huge, tedious slog, too resistant to change, too big, too ambitious. I wanted this project to be fun for me to do. I wanted it to be smaller. Not totally succeeding at that part, but I'm doing my best. And I wanted the plan to be open to change as I see what works and what doesn't work, and to have the freedom to cut things out that are too ambitious, add things that I learn about during the development process, and incorporate things that occur to me while I'm working on it that I maybe didn't know about when I started. Sometime after the procedural island generation, I started adding some trees and bushes and things to the islands to create a world that is a little bit more alive. And I'm not going through these features in the exact order I implemented them in. Like, for example, I think the trees came much later. They were a more recent addition. But I'm going to go through the features in a way that logically makes sense to me, because otherwise I don't know how I'm going to go through all of this quickly. But the trees and bushes are not super refined right now. They don't have any colliders, any animation to simulate like wind. They're just there to kind of fill the space and make it look more like an island for now. I also did the water shader, pieced together from a couple of internet tutorials. I've done shader stuff before. I actually think shaders are really fun, but I'm not great at water, so I've relied heavily on other people's expertise here. That said, I think it came out pretty good. And one thing that I really wanted that works well is the indication of depth for things below the surface. So like as the fish are deeper in the water, they're a little bit harder to see. And I think that effect works really well for something like this. Then, in order to enable some of the game features, I added some objects that the player can interact with. And this whole system and code needs some refactoring. I believe I've talked about it before, but it's just very messy, a little bit spaghetti. So sometime I'm going to need to rework this so it's a little bit easier to expand on and a little bit easier to maintain. But right now, you know, it is what it is. I use a lot of different events and things are kind of hooked up a little bit in a fragile way. The next big chunk I want to talk through is the fishing system itself, which is the core thing, the main mechanic. This is what the game is all about, so there is a lot here that's already done, and there's still more to go. I started this system early, and I've been refining it as I implement some other things, and every time I think about adding to the game plan, I try to keep this system in mind and make sure it makes sense, because this is the fun part. This is the main piece, and I want to make sure that the focus remains here and the other features I add support this feature. As a baseline, I started with the idea of fishing nodes because of how I would like to structure the rest of the game as a sort of roguelite that you progress through in discrete fishing runs. I didn't want just like a free-for-all, infinite fishing in any body of water. I wanted there to be specific points that get used up during the run, so I got those in with the interactable object work, and every fishing node generates fish based on the island type, and it uses a weighted table to generate more of the common fish and less of the rare fish. And the loot table that I use for fish generation is also adjustable based on some player stuff that I'll talk about a little bit later. Fishing system also has a mini game with a UI that I very recently updated. I did a whole video about an earlier version of this mini game, and the original design was a pretty traditional rhythm game. But it's changed a lot, and it's going to change a little bit more based on some ideas that are currently in flight, but it's still going to be timing based like a rhythm game. And right now there are 3 like lanes. I'm going to simplify this down, I think, to just 1. And you'll also see this new UI shows some information about the fish and some new pieces of information that I didn't have in the early version. My vision here is that each fish has like a certain amount of health, essentially, and when they run out of this health, they are caught. They get more tired over time, so they're more resistant to like damage, as I'm calling it, at the beginning, and then they slowly get more tired and take more damage. It's not really meant to be like a violent thing, but that's kind of the terminology that makes sense to me, is that this is a battle. Meanwhile, the player will have a couple of fishing actions that I have not implemented at all yet, but I want these actions to be kind of like skills in an MMO. I'll be honest, this was inspired by V-Rising, all the V-Rising I played, where you have options for different ways you can react to enemies, but I do also want to keep the way that V-Rising does this, where you just have a couple. You can have a couple active at a time, and I want to give them sort of themes about how they work, and so you can have different builds. That's kind of my plan. Of course, none of that is in yet. And then on top of that, all of the results of every action, whether it's like a basic attack, which is what I have now, or like a more special attack, it's going to be like amplified by how close to perfect timing you have. So the timing aspect is there. And then there's also this idea of like doing damage to catch the fish faster and things like that. I recently went through and did a little design session on this, specifically on the UI, where I wanna make some things a little bit more clear at a glance, have some less text on here, and hopefully make it a little bit clearer and easier to play. But this is what it looks like right now. You can play it, and at the end, you can catch a fish. When you catch a fish, it goes into your inventory. The inventory is extremely simple right now. It'll probably continue to be fairly simple, with just a couple more like bits of information available here. The fish that you caught also gets tracked in the Fishadex. That's not the final name, maybe it is, but it's kind of a working title. The Fishadex is also extremely simple right now, and all of the UI that you see here is very placeholder UI that I just threw together. Especially don't look at these icons. I hate them, I need to redo them. I had an idea that didn't really pan out, and I never fixed that idea, and so I need to go through and draw some icons and jazz some of this up. Every fish that you catch also is randomly generated with a set of parameters, which means there are variations in the size, shape, and color. While it still is, within the guidelines to look like a certain type of fish, it's going to be a little bit different with every fish that you catch. I talked a lot about this system across a few different videos, because this was really important to me to have this variety and the fun of like getting really big fish or really small fish or fish in special colors. I think that's a fun aspect of collectors like this, and so I wanted this system to support it, and I feel pretty good about how it came out. In addition to visual differences, the fish will also have a base value that's going to be used in the shop eventually. So every fish that you catch will be worth some amount based on the type of fish that it is and also the size of that individual fish. Another thing that I need to do is go in and add more types of fish. I've got a couple in the game. There's really very few. Even the ones I like designed and made resources for, I didn't actually put in the islands yet. So that's one of the big things I want to work on next. I built out this cool system, I just have to actually use it and fill it out with information, with content. And with that, I might be glossing over some things, but I think we are at the point of the last devlog, so this is kind of what I've got right now. Now let's talk about what I have done in the past few months during my V-Rising fugue state. The biggest piece that I've gotten done is architectural. I had the island generation and I had the fishing, but I didn't have a mechanism through which the player could actually go to different islands from the starting point. I just had a button that would regenerate it when you pressed it. So the very first thing I actually did for this was implement the beginnings of a save system. This is because I wanted to give the player a home island to come back to after the fishing run. In the long term, my goal is to put a little shop here where you can sell your fish, but for now it's just another island that looks the same every time you start the game. So I created a data structure to save all the island information in. It keeps track of which procedural generation pieces are used, where they're positioned, which landscape objects are on those pieces, so like trees and bushes and whatnot, and it saves it out to a file and then loads it back up when you start the game. I've done this before, so it wasn't too bad, but it took a lot of back and forth with the procedural generation code to make sure I was saving everything out in a way that was easy to like rebuild the island from that information. With that done, I started on the roguelite feature. I spent some time thinking on this one, and in the end, the design is fairly traditional, nothing crazy here. When the player goes on a fishing run, I'll generate a map basically, so that each island has, a number of options that they can go to from that island. So every time they teleport away, they can choose, like 1, 2, 3, however many options I give them. Think of like Cult of the Lamb or that coffee shop game that's inspired by PlateUp, where it's like a tree and you traverse the tree to the boss level. And I do want like a boss level at the end. I need to think through like what this looks like exactly. I have some ideas, but currently there's just a normal island at the end and then you return home. You also can't see the map of islands right now, it's just in code. But I would like to add a little visual later that kind of shows like what you can expect when you go to the different islands, like a clue about what might be there that you would want to go get. I had to do a lot of fairly boring code work to get this done, which I think is why it took so long to finish. It involved like listening to interactions with the teleporter, checking the map structure to see what islands are available, showing the player a simple UI for their options, getting the feedback on what they selected, regenerating that new island, and then also detecting when you're at the end and returning home. And at this point I had to start thinking about the progression of the run itself. I took a little detour where I was thinking about the mana, which I don't believe I mentioned, but before this, the player had like an amount of mana and then they would use it to fish. I changed this, so fishing itself is free, you're just limited by how many nodes are available on the island, but the teleporter uses mana, and instead of starting with an amount of mana, you actually have to sacrifice fish that you catch during the run to get mana to use the teleporter, and this ties into some like lore ideas that I have. So the player is going to have to catch fish, decide which of those fish they want to keep, and also decide if they want to sacrifice them to get the power to move forward, or if they just want to take what they've got and go home. So I spent some time reworking the mana so that it worked this way instead of the previous way, adding the ability to consume fish from your inventory. I might adjust how this works again later. There's some things that don't quite work out the way I want them to, but this is how it works for now. And then the next natural step for any roguelite is to add cards. I've been calling these buff cards, effects. I can never quite agree on like terminology for different code things. It's a big problem. But I'll call them buffs here. But each time you advance to an island, you get a choice between 2 buffs, and getting these implemented all the way was hugely slow for me. I don't know why. I just didn't want to work on it. I wasn't interested. I had to force myself to finish this feature, and I'm glad that it's done so I can move on with my life. But I have a small set of cards right now. Some increase like your catching power, some increase a stat that I'm calling utility, which is basically how much leeway you get for a perfect hit in terms of timing. Some of the buffs make rare fish spawn more often, and they all have different lifespans, so some buffs last for the next island only, and these are usually much stronger. Some last for the whole rest of the run, and you can get like 2 of the same one that stack together to give you a bigger buff. I also want to add in some extremely rare lifetime buffs, but I need to basically add another loot table to the buff generation to make that work, because right now it just picks randomly from each buff. So that's where we're at. You can start a fishing run, you can do your fishing, catch them, fill out your fish index, advance to the next round, eat the fish to gain their power, and then eventually you do return home, and that's it. So much progress in a year, and it's really nice to look back at everything I got done, especially when I keep in mind just how busy I was with other things like work, all the home repairs, the pet stress. I feel really good about how much I've done, even though, you know, I think about I think about the time I spent, which we'll talk about next. So how much time did all of this take me? Real hours of work. I've had a time tracking habit for years, so this wasn't special for this project, but I've tracked all the time I've spent on this project since I started it. And this is including development time, time for designing or brainstorming, and also time to create any art assets. So starting in October 2023, I did 18 hours. November 2023, 2 hours, because I was doing a lot of writing in November. December 2023, 39 hours. This was the most from the past year. January, 6 hours. February, 9 hours. March, 28 hours. April, 32 hours. May, 13 hours. June, 18 hours. July, 6 hours. August, 13 hours. September, 15 hours. And then this October, which is over now, 14 hours. And this adds up to a grand total of 213 hours. I do feel pretty good about this, but it does make me a little sad to think that this is the hour equivalent of like 5 or 6 full-time work weeks. Oh, I can't dwell on it. I've got a lot going on and I've got to pay my bills, but oh man, it sucks to think about how much more progress I could have made if I didn't also have to work full-time and do all the other things I'm doing. But I did my best balancing my many projects, and it's really awesome how some of these months I was able to get 30 or 40 hours of work in. You know, it's doable. I just have to get my priorities in line. I unfortunately have to keep my game playing to a minimum. Though strangely, May and June and July, which are my biggest V Rising months, were not all the lowest months that I had. I don't remember what I was doing in January and February this year, but I must have been real burned out or something because I barely got any game work done. But in general, pretty good. I feel proud of this work, and I'm going to continue trying to prioritize game efforts over some of the other things I'm doing. So that's everything I have done. That's all the time it took me to do it. Now let's talk about what's next. The very next thing I want to do for this game is start to flesh out the fish that are available and do a first pass on balancing some of the fish values, their rarity, their stats for the minigame, refine the minigame a little bit so it plays a little bit more smoothly, and also to balance the amount of fish that spawn for each island. It's a little bit random right now, a little bit too random. And so I want to fill out what I have right now and start to make this feel more like a game than a proof of concept. Because even though I have ideas for additional features like the shop for some building stuff, some different fishing tools, I want to start by refining this piece of the game because, as I said, this is the core of it. This is the main part, and I want to make sure it's solid, and I want to make sure it's fun before I expand the breadth of the game and start to add things. And then further down the road, I would like to have a building system with a little fish shop that you can customize. That's kind of the thing that inspired this game, actually. I specifically want to have aquariums where you could put the fish on display. This is my dream. That's kind of the goal I'm working towards. But all of this stuff, I think, has to act as the foundation for it. But there it is. A year of my life went into this game, among other things. And I feel like it was well spent. I'd love to get to a place where I can spend more regular time on game development each week, but I'm really proud of what I was able to do here. If you are also excited to see where this project goes in the next year, don't forget to subscribe. I'll do my best not to fall into another V-Rising black hole, or a black hole of some other game that I haven't played yet, but no promises. You can also catch me streaming games on Twitch if that's more your speed. But I'll be back here on YouTube with another video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Alright, goodbye!